any of that stuff. What they were doing is, how do we use this pandemic to suppress free speech, to censor social media and the media, to close churches, to lock down society, to force people to wear masks, and then funnel them into the chute of mass vaccination with a quickly created and untested zero liability vaccine. Every one of them does the same thing. None of them is about public health. It's a militarized and monetized response. And they're play acting all of these strategies for how do we get Americans to go along with us. Well, the CIA, has for many, many years has studied ways of doing not only individual manipulation, doing mass manipulation of society. How do you go into a developing country or an indigenous country, turn the population, cause economic chaos, shut down the economy, polarize people against each other, and create violence and chaos to the point where that country will be happy to have an outside,
Machiavellian kind of stuff,
come in and control the whole thing. And how do you sow fear and use propaganda, et cetera? One of the ways the CIA figured out all of these methodologies, which is put in handbook after handbook. And, the CIA does not do public health, by the way. It does coup d'etats against democracy. So between 1947 and 1998, the CIA was involved in 87 coups d'etats against a third of the nations on Earth, most of them democracies. So that's what they do. The way that they studied this is they farmed out studies to sociologists at about 300 universities. These were programs called MK Ultra, MK Surge, Operation Artichoke, et cetera. But it was all done by the universities, billions and billions of dollars. One of those studies took place in the 1960s and 70s, and it was done by early 1970s by a guy called Stanley Milgram, who was a young associate professor at Yale. And Milgram recruited people from every walk of American life, black people, white people, students, professors, professionals, every kind of American. He would put the subject in a room, sit them on a chair, and there was a dial in front of them. And they were told there was a person in the next room who was tied to a chair. And when they turned this dial, it would administer an electric shock to that person. That person in the other room was actually a Confederate and was an actor. And the doctor, Dr. Milgram, who was wearing a stethoscope and a white lab coat, so he had this kind of imprimatur of authority. He would tell the people, turn it up. They could hear the subject screaming, shouting, pleading, begging, crying in the other room and struggling. And all of the people who recruited begged the doctor to allow them to stop. But the doctor said, no, higher. Well, if you can look this up in Wikipedia, and actually reports it accurately. It's called the Milgram experiment. 67% of the people turned it up to 250 volts where it was marked potentially lethal. So they knew not to do that. And every value they had to compromise to do that, but they did it because they were taking orders from somebody that they believed was a trusted authority. And that's what Milgram concluded, that if you have somebody who's dressed up like a doctor, 67% of the people will violate their most deeply held values. And okay, so we've got, we're just in a huge Milgram experiment here. We got Anthony Fauci in his white lab coat telling people it's okay to get rid of jury trials, which they did, against anybody who's involved in a countermeasure. It's okay to suppress free speech. We all know better than that. It's okay to close every church in our country for a year. We know you can't do that. There's no pandemic exception in the United States Constitution. And by the way, the framers knew all about pandemic. There were two pandemics during the Revolutionary War, a smallpox and a yellow fever pandemic the smallpox epidemic actually stopped us. We'd already taken control of Montreal. Canada would have been part of the United States except for that pandemic. Between the end of the revolution and the signing of the Constitution, there were epidemics in almost every city that killed tens of thousands of people: cholera, yellow fever, smallpox, etc. So they knew all about it. Mm-hmm. They did not put an epidemic exception in the United States Constitution. And so these people knew, okay, you don't abolish property rights. You don't close 3.3 million businesses without due process, without just compensation. You don't completely shut down the Fourth Amendment right to be free of warrantless searches and seizures. And now you've got to show your medical records to get into a public building. This is all against our Constitution. So we all know you don't violate the Bill of Rights. They violated every single one of the first 10 Bill of Rights, except for the Second Amendment. And so people knew better. They did it anyway. Here's the good news, is that 33% of the people that Milgram recruited got up and walked out. And the people that you're having on this show today are part of that 33%. Mm-hmm. And, there's Republicans in that 33%, there's Democrats in that 33%, and that's where the realignment is. Mm-hmm. And, the way that I look at it, I don't hold it against people who are in my family or other people who have been subjected to this propaganda psyop, right? And they're doing what they're told, and they're trying to do the right thing, to obey the trusted authorities, and they're terrified, and fear, incapacitates you. So I don't blame them, but what I see that our job is to fight for them until they can wake up and start fighting for themselves.